At the next agenda item, we have indicated that this meeting that we would, the council would be taking up and hopefully voting on the matter of fluoridation, which was put before us at an earlier meeting. I do believe we're prepared to take that up at this time. We have a full complement of council members here, which was our objective. We felt it was a substantive matter, and that we hope to have the benefit of everyone's counsel and vote.
In 1977, we were approached by the Crawford County Dental Society and their president with a petition asking that the council and urging the council to take steps to initiate fluoridation in the city water supply. I would move the City Council accept the recommendation of the Crawford County Dental Society and would direct the city solicitor to draft the appropriate legislation to implement the proposal as set forth in the petition of the Crawford County Dental Society of January 26, 1977, Your Honor.
All right, is that document available?
I have the document here, Your Honor. I think the city clerk has it.
So the motion is once more, will you give me the sense?
Accept, Your Honor, the recommendation of the Crawford County Dental Society and directing the city solicitor to draft legislation appropriate to implement the proposal as set forth in the society's petition.
All right.
Effectively, Your Honor, this would, well, of course, it's straightforward.
All right. You've heard the motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Your Honor, I'll second it, so it can be on the floor.
All right, sir. It's been moved by Mr. Kowicki and seconded by Mr. Stanton. The floor is open for discussion, and Mr. Kowicki, you would have the opportunity to speak first, if that's your wish. Mr. Stanton, second.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to speak first to the issue, if I may. There are a lot of comment, a lot of mail on this issue, and as a lawyer, of course, kind of get verbose occasionally. So I've decided tonight, one of the first times, to draft some notes to help me along. Few issues have generated as much public enthusiasm in the city of Meadville recently as has the issue of fluoridation. At the outset, I was warned by some that fluoridation was an explosive issue, that to discuss it publicly would be to invite disaster, that the issue of fluoridation would tear the city apart, as it allegedly did 10 years ago, and that would create wounds and divisions so great that Meadville would never be the same again. There has been some excitement over the past few months, but the debate has not been detrimental. Contrary to what we have heard and read concerning this issue, there's been a great deal of benefit to the citizens and indeed to city government itself. All too frequently, the City Council plays its legislative role to an empty chamber. Too few of our citizens avail themselves of the opportunity to view their government at work either personally or via cable channel TV. If fluoridation does nothing more here tonight, it will have at least awakened public interest in the operation and function of local government. During the past several months, we have heard both pro and anti-fluoridation advocates. There's been much editorializing. Significant efforts have been made by those who sincerely believe that the introduction of sodium fluoride to the city's water supply will produce bone and teeth deformities as well as other maladies. Pictorial representations have been displayed in recent editions of the local newspaper showing the alleged effects of fluoridation on dogs, cows, Arizona Indians, Italian peasants, and other subjects, all allegedly having had the misfortune to ingest what anti-fluoridation advocates label as a poisonous chemical compound. The decision of whether or not Meadville's water system will be fluoridated, however, does not rest with either the pro or the anti-fluoridationists. The introduction of this modern-day health miracle rests in the final analysis on the decision of the elected members of this council. We have been advised by our solicitor that the law, as propounded in the third-class city code, mandates that matters concerning public health be acted upon by elected representatives and not be left to the whim or discretion of the public in a referendum vote. This is as it should be. To safeguard public health in any community is a task of the first magnitude. It's an indispensable public undertaking. It is something, moreover, that cannot be left to individual preference or discretion for many reasons, not the least of which, ignorance or carelessness in any individual instance may entail danger to the whole community. A man's political or religious beliefs may be his own, but his ideas of disease prevention, cure, and public health are not. It is a well-settled maxim that the health of the people is the first law, and that all else is subordinate thereto. The legal authority wisely lodges in elected municipal officials' discretion the power to enact ordinances to provide and enforce public health regulations. Those who argue that 5 elected officials should not decide the fluoride issue because it does not square with ideas of democracy are simply suggesting that council abdicate their responsibility to govern. My personal research has been interesting and informative to me. The development of scientific public health work is really the product of fairly recent origin. Health protection did not rest upon any scientific basis until the turn of this century, when the germ theory of diseases had been worked out and accepted. This theory completely restructured the world's conception of diseases and its causes. It provided an intelligible and complete explanation for many things which had been looked on for centuries as hidden mysteries. During the Middle Ages and well into modern times, plagues and epidemics swept over Europe unchecked. They were commonly looked on as manifestations of divine anger. The superstition which attributed disease to supernatural intervention has been hard to kill. Even yet, it has not been totally eliminated or exterminated in civilized societies. Nor is this surprising, for there are people still living in American communities who remember the days when typhoid was attributed to bad ventilation, diphtheria to sewer gas, yellow fever to contaminated water, smallpox to the presence of manure piles, and tuberculosis to heredity. There literally has been a revolution over the past 50 years in public health work through municipal administration. A generation ago, the sanitary inspectors condemned everything that looked or smelled bad with little heed to the routes of direct infection between individuals. Today, the emphasis has shifted to preventative measures, such as the inspection of food, milk, and the protection of water supplies. Other radical changes have been effected. As suggested, the old Public Health Administration was concerned almost exclusively with prevention of diseases by discovering and eliminating their ostensible causes. The new public health has taken on the more important task of developing methods of promoting immunity from disease by immunization and inoculation. How many parents today would deny their children the routine DPT immunization series, smallpox vaccination, or polio immunization? There are those who can still remember yellow fever epidemics, deaths from scarlet fever, tuberculosis, typhoid, diphtheria, and other diseases. Today, in progressive communities, these diseases are non-existent because of the responsiveness of progressive thinking community leaders and their acceptance of modern-day health miracles brought about by scientific research. The complete disappearances of all diseases, in my opinion, is only a matter of time, education, acceptance, and the responsiveness of community leaders. What does all this have to do about fluoridation? As we all know, the disease of tooth decay affects nearly all Americans. Although not a contagious disease, dental caries or tooth decay presently constitutes one of the most challenging public health problems in the United States. 95% of the population of the United States has some experience with dental caries by the time they reach adulthood. More than half the population over 55 years of age have no natural teeth at all. A 1965 survey indicated that 2/3 of the Head Start children across the country were already in need of dental repairs. Most of these children were less than 5 years of age. Various methods of dealing with the problem of dental caries have been advocated over the years. Fluoridation of drinking water is far the most noted method suggestion. Parents with growing children are particularly and acutely aware of this insidious disease, which strikes with reckless abandon the rich and the poor alike, without regard to race, color, or creed. The disease-resisting power of the individual, therefore, assumes an important factor in stemming the continuation of tooth decay. The ability of the teeth to resist the disease of decay may be acquired in various ways, not the least of which is the introduction of a disease-preventative additive into the human body. Many of our senior citizens are concerned about the bad effects of fluoride. Extensive research into the effectiveness and safety of water fluoridation has been conducted over a period of several decades. As an example of the breadth and depth of this effort, a list of approximately 3,500 references on biological properties of fluoride and the effect of fluoride on bones and teeth was compiled in 1965. the overwhelming experience of fluoridated communities, which today incidentally affect nearly 120 million people in this great nation, showed that 65% less decay was evident in children using fluoridated water from birth than their contemporaries in non-fluoridated communities, and no evidence of harmful effects to the older citizens. It is true that experience teaches that at first fluoridation benefits children only. However, as these children grow to adulthood, the benefits affect an increasing portion of the population. The basis of the success of fluoridation can only be measured against the overwhelming evidence scientists have acquired over the past 30 years. The advances which the world has made in dental hygiene during this time is one of the mightiest achievements of modern civilization. Who's brought about the revolution? Certainly not those who condemn the proponents of fluoridation, nor those who toil in the fields and factories, to whose effort we are so often taught that all wealth and progress are due. First and last, it has been the work of highly trained scientists and professional people. If the remarkable advances in dental and medical technology is to be continued, it can be carried on in no other way. Let those who scoff at science, research, and dental professionals tell us how they would set about prolonging the days of a man's years. Due to the controversial nature of the fluoridation process, many of the problems attributed to fluoridation are more imagined than real. One of the very first objections that I remember was that its chemicals were thought to be corrosive. The important thing to remember here is that 1 part per million of even the most corrosive substances known to man would have no effect at that dilution. Then there are those who argue that the decision to fluoridate would be irreversible and that state government may refuse the discontinuation of fluoride once begun. That's hogwash. A municipality has the absolute and complete authority to reverse itself on any measures it later may deem appropriate or inappropriate to the public health, safety, or welfare of its citizenry. Those who claim the water will not smell good, will not taste good, that it has a harmful effect on humans, or that will cause a variety of physical or mental ailments, are denying to themselves the clear, convincing, and overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The fluoride ion is tasteless, colorless, and odorless, even at much higher concentrations than those employed in water treatment processes. Every national organization in the United States today which speaks with authority on health issues have adopted policies endorsing and re-endorsing measures favorable to fluoridation because of the public health benefits derived. Others who advocate that fluoride is a poisonous substance which will stain teeth, produce allergic reaction, accelerate the growth of cancer, or harm the elderly in a fluoridated community are equally uninformed. The overwhelming evidence which scientific research and studies gathered over the past 30-odd years points only to major dental benefits without harm to the community public health. It is contended by some that fluoridation of the public water supply is an unconstitutional deprivation of individual liberty. It is alleged that it denies the individual the freedom of choice in a matter relating to his bodily care and health by compelling him to drink fluoridated water, and that human freedoms ought not to be mandated by a municipal body. This argument is blind to the uncontroverted facts that, 1, tooth decay is an almost universal, incurable, chronic disease with serious public health consequences. 2, the health of the public is an important concern of the municipality and an appropriate subject for governmental regulation. And 3, the presence of an optimal amount of fluoride in the human diet has been shown to be an effective agent in preventing tooth decay. Fluoridation no more constitutes a form of compulsory mass medication than do other community-wide measures for disease prevention, such as water chlorination. Such arguments of municipally mandated mass medication must fail when considered in this light, especially when we already know that the citizens of our own community are receiving varying amounts of fluoride, which nature has generously already placed in our water supply. Students of the constitutional form of government know that our Constitution does not recognize an absolute and uncontrollable liberty. Liberty implies the absence of arbitrary restraint, not immunity from reasonable regulations and prohibitions imposed in the interest of the public health of the community. There are manifold restraints to which every person is necessarily subject for the common good. On any other basis, organized society could not exist with safety to its members. The issue of the public health imposes an affirmative duty upon municipal officials to act affirmatively when presented with a public health problem. Such a problem exists in our community. It must be acted upon. It's interesting to note that in 1965, Connecticut became the first state to enact statewide legislation requiring municipalities to adjust the fluoride content of waters having an insufficient level. Since that time, Minnesota, Illinois, Delaware, Michigan, Georgia, South Dakota, Ohio, and Nebraska have enacted similar legislation. Some eminent and respected citizens in the community have suggested that the cost involved in the fluoridation process will eventually bring about a tax increase. It is difficult for me to put a price tag on a miracle. How much is one willing to pay to effect a cure for cancer or heart disease? But fortunately enough, we need not concern ourselves with this, as our city engineers have estimated startup costs to be only about $11,300, and for which we as city officials already know there are grants available to promote the startup cost in fluoridating our water supply. Annual cost after the initial expense, it is estimated, would be approximately 20 cents per year per citizen. Hardly enough to be concerned about an increase in taxation. I suppose I could continue rebutting the arguments which those opposed to fluoridation have advanced. I suppose it would be futile and time-consuming, as one person trying to teach an old dog new tricks. Suffice to say that on my part, few issues have received as much study, research, and deliberation as has the issue of fluoridation. As an elected official, I pledge to represent the citizens of this community, to make decisions which reflected my best judgment and honest conviction, without regard to popularity or political expediency of those decisions. Yes, there are those who have threatened political sanctions against me, and even those who have suggested that they would have to find a new attorney if I voted in favor of fluoridation. To those people, I say that it is my judgment that this important public health measure ought not be decided on whether it is politically expedient or whether it is popular. Rather, the decision must be made in the light of the vital public health benefits to be derived, with a view to the continuation of a progressive community where our children can grow up with strong and healthy body and minds, and with council's blessings, fewer cavities. My judgment is that fluoridation of the public water supply of the city of Meadville will bring about beneficial results with the investment of only minimal dollars, and I accordingly endorse the recommendation of the Crawford County Dental Society. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Kowicki. Mr. Stanton, you were the seconder of the motion. You have the wish to speak next.
Well, Your Honor, I just well forgo the opportunity. Having been through this a couple times, I'd rather hear, some of the other members of council first. Right. I'd only seconded it in relation to get it on the floor.
All right, you'll yield. Is there another councilman who wishes to speak?
Your Honor, in view of the fact that you'd indicated to the press your views, apparently you don't believe you need to say anything more about the issue now.
I may have some comments to make as an anchorman, but I think I'm pretty well on record. Yes, Councilman.
I'd like to defer to Mr. DeMaria.
Mr. DeMaria?
Yes, Your Honor. I have a statement I would like to read, and then I would like to speak on it.
All right, sir.
The question of fluoridation of water system is a complex one that finds experts in the related fields at odds with each other. The evidence, taken collectively, would seem to indicate overwhelming support of the safety of communal fluoridation. Collective evidence, however, regardless of its near unanimity, is apparently not sufficient to convince many people and communities that fluoride is a means of effectively reducing the incidence of human dental caries without infringing upon individual health practices, legal rights, or religious beliefs, and without adverse toxicological effect on the organism. America has remained steadfast as a nation where individuals can voice objections to personal intervention without retaliation, and has developed a system wherein freedom of speech prevails and individual investigation and research is encouraged. In the case of fluoridation of the Meadville water system and the response from the community, it would seem that the system is working, that freedom of speech has been exercised. And however tiresome some of the letters to the editor may have been, we should be thankful that the local newspaper has permitted this expression of one of our most basic freedoms. I am concerned, however, at some of the responses that seem to be less than tolerant and respectful of other opinions and viewpoints. This expression and difference of opinion is a healthy and positive sign of public concern and citizen involvement. And whatever the outcome of a given issue, the community cannot help but benefit from diversity of opinion. As a public official, any decision that is made must of necessity be made from a different viewpoint than that of a private citizen. As a private citizen, my concerns would be first of myself and my family. But as a public official, my scope must go beyond selfish interest, and my concern must be of the wide range of all affected individuals. So in spite of the fact that many prestigious organizations and individuals endorse artificial fluoridation, and in view of the fact that it is available by other means at a relatively inexpensive cost, also, in my research of the subject, I have found enough evidence to indicate questionable and adverse effect on some people. I would encourage City Council to vote no to the issue of fluoridating Meadville's water system. Now, Your Honor, I do have some other material I would like to present, and I find it very difficult where to start and where to stop. We were given a great amount of material. Two pamphlets, I think, that were probably most significant were one from the American Medical Association and the other from the American Dental Association. Those that are opposed to fluoridation also made available to Council 2 textbooks as well as other information. On the back of the ADA's pamphlet, as Mr. Kowicki mentioned, there are numerous professional organizations that endorse fluoridation of communal water. It's very difficult to oppose, you might say, the wisdom and judgment of these professional men and the organizations they represent. So how do you do it? How do you try to get a subjective opinion? Well, about 5 or 6 months ago, Dr. Kellogg approached me and asked me what my opinions were on fluoridation, because he did indicate he felt it would be presented to Council in the near future. At that time, I responded that I really didn't know, because I had not been faced with that decision, and I really had not had the opportunity to investigate it. Since that time, I have. Well, how do you investigate something like this? You have people on this side that say there's nothing wrong with it. You have people on this side that say there's nothing good about it. So what I did was go to these 2 pamphlets, and totally there are over 200 footnotes in these pamphlets documenting the statements that they make. So I went to the footnotes in each of these. And I would like to take the opportunity at this time to thank the Meadville Public Library and Mrs. Gertzog and her workers, especially Lori Tynan, the Allegheny College Library for the use of their facilities. And through the support and cooperation of Mrs. Gertzog, I was able to secure from the Falk Library at the University of Pittsburgh Medical School a computer search and printout of one of the areas that I was a little concerned with and couldn't find much information about. So I did a lot of research on the matter, and how do you present it? I've got a briefcase here filled with notes and copies and statements, and I find it difficult because I don't want to sound like a super doctor or a super dentist. So I felt that the best way to approach this might be to refer to these 2 pamphlets, to some of the statements they make, some of the studies that they quote from, and then perhaps go into those in a little bit more detail than these pamphlets do, giving you my reason for having a little bit of concern and perhaps more of a questioning attitude. To start with the pamphlet from the American Dental Association, well, perhaps before I do that, I might read this particular statement. This is from the Journal of the American Medical Association, March 15, 1958. It is in the section of the journal concerning questions and answers. Question, quote, exactly what tests and office procedures can be used to determine individual idiosyncrasy or intolerance to fluoride? Are there practical tests available to the family doctor which he can use to determine whether various subjective complaints are actually caused by fluoride ingestion or just fear reaction? That is, concrete tests which may be used to identify early signs of fluoride poisoning so that a family physician may be guided in his treatment, unquote. Now, that's from a Dr. Levine in Brooklyn, New York. And the answer. The heading to this particular section does make the comment that the answers are answered by qualified and competent individuals. There's no signature attached to the answer, but the journal itself, the editorial staff, I presume, gives the answer. Quote, what is here asked does not exist. There are no simple tests for blood or urinary fluorides, such as may be carried out by a physician in his office or by the usual clinical laboratory. Precise tests require a high degree of chemical skill and equipment of uncommon nature, unquote. The answer goes on further, and I do want to qualify this. The answer continues that these tests were made in studies and no confirmed reports of chronic fluoride poisoning from properly fluoridated waters was found. So on the one hand, they do answer that the local family physician really is going to have a difficult time diagnosing fluoride poisoning. But they're also saying that very substantial studies have been made and analyzed, and there have been no confirmed reports of chronic fluoride poisoning. But I think it's important to keep in mind that and incidentally, even though this is dated 1958, I have consulted with some doctors, and that answer is still true today. On page 14 of the ADA pamphlet, section 21, it talks about a great number of statistics, and in Mr. Kowicki's presentation, he quoted approximately 65% reduction in dental caries, and that particular section quotes from various studies that have been made, citing 50 to 63%, 48 to 50%, 58%, 41%, and so on. I would like to refer to one study that is the granddaddy of all of the studies in fluoridation. In 1945, there were two studies that were started. One was in Grand Rapids and Muskegon. Grand Rapids was fluoridated, 1 part per million. Muskegon was fluoride-free. Newburgh, New York, and the name of the other one escapes me right now. Newburgh, New York, and Kingston, New York was the control city. Newburgh was fluoridated to 1 part per million. Newburgh was not fluoridated. Now, those two studies were started at approximately the same time in 1945. They were to continue for 10 years. I would like to refer to the Grand Rapids Muskegon study, which is usually quoted most frequently. First of all, Grand Rapids was fluoridated at 1 part per million. Muskegon was fluoride-free, relatively speaking. At the end of 6.5 years approximately, in July of 1951, Muskegon fluoridated their water. So for all practical purposes, there was no control city. Grand Rapids had been fluoridated from 1945 all the way through. Muskegon started fluoridation in 1951. There are approximately 4 reports that were issued. One is a 4-year report, a 6.5-year report, a 10-year report, and a 15-year report. I think that the 6.5-year report may be the most meaningful because after 6.5 years, there was no control city. So what were they comparing against? Now, they do go on to a 15-year study, which I won't go into, but just using some of the statistics that they use in their literature. First of all, I should say this, that there definitely was a reduction in dental caries. That is open to some dispute. I don't know that I agree with it. There is one theory that it only delays the onset of dental caries and doesn't completely reduce them. I don't know that I agree with that, but there is that theory. The study itself, quote, the reduction in Grand Rapids ranged, after 6.5 years, from 66.6% to 18.1% reduction in permanent teeth after 6.5 years in Grand Rapids. 66.6% to 18.1% reduction in caries in Grand Rapids after 6.5 years. That's true. But nowhere in the literature could I find anything saying that Muskegon also had a reduction in dental caries, and they weren't fluoridated. Using the same year, the same figures, in Muskegon there was a reduction in dental caries ranging from 1% to 16%. In Grand Rapids, the overall reduction from age 6 to 16 was an average of 31%. You take every age group, the percent reduction that they had, the average was 31% for Grand Rapids. Good. But again, nowhere in the literature does it say anything about Muskegon, who had a reduction of 7% overall. Now, I find that a little strange that there's no explanation for a non-fluoridated city having a reduction in caries. Now, the report also states at the peak, and this is right from the report, at the peak of prevalence, 6 years of age, the caries rate for the deciduous teeth was reduced by about 54%, Grand Rapids. True. But in Muskegon, the same age group had a reduction of 32%. And a result not reported in the literature, but was in the report, was that in Grand Rapids, the fluoridated city, fluorosis, or modeling of the teeth, was increased from 25% of the children in 1944 to 36% of the children in 1954. Now, that is from the report. On page 7 of the ADA pamphlet, the statement is made, quote, well, first of all, I should perhaps explain, this is section 8, and the section is titled, Will Fluoridated Water Damage Internal Organs, Especially the Kidneys? At approximately the middle of that particular section, they make a statement that is footnoted to a report in the Public Health Report. Quote, when subjects with severe kidney disease were examined post-mortem, even the highest bone fluoride levels found were within normal limits. Well, that's a true statement. That's right out of the report. However, I'd like to tell you what the report was about and read to you a few other things that were in that very same report. First of all, this was a study that was made in Utah. The study was in September of '55 through August of 1960. The bodies of 127 patients were autopsied, aged 15 years and older. They had resided 10 or more years in the area of Utah County. Quote, this is the reason for the study. The presence of elevated concentrations of fluoride in the atmosphere has been associated with changes in certain plants and an increase in the fluoride content of forage in certain areas of Utah. Long-term ingestion of such forage by some animals has produced changes characteristic of fluorosis in some of them, fluorosis poisoning. It seemed important to determine if man also was being adversely affected, unquote. The reason for this study was to determine if the human body was being affected by fluorides in the atmosphere. Right out of the study, an analysis of Utah County water supply revealed less than 0.5 part per million of fluoride. So the study really had nothing to do with the fluoridation of water, but really with fluoride in the atmosphere as related to what I've said. Now let me read to you right from the report. And it just about parallels the statement I read to you from the journal, from the leaflet. The highest fluoride levels found in subjects with the most severe kidney disease were within the normal range. That's about exactly as it appeared in here. However, let me continue with the same sentence, the same paragraph. And no disease associated with fluoride was evident, period. Because the number of cases of chronic renal disease in this series was limited, further studies seem advisable. Possible differences in fluoride metabolism and its patterns of deposition in bones may exist in chronic renal disease. Further study and comparison of fluoride levels in these diseases are needed to evaluate the many other possible factors in the wide differences in bone fluoride levels in this small collection of cases. Now, I think this statement is fine as far as it went, but I think that the actual study that they took the statement from says something a little different than what that says. On page 8, is fluoridation harmful to bones? And there are several paragraphs on fluoride and bones, osteoporosis, and so on and so forth, with the elderly, bone weakening, things of that type, hardness of the bones. I have no footnotes for the first section I'm going to refer to, but I have 3 studies that I came across that I would like to read from. Is fluoride beneficial to bones? Does it help to prevent, alleviate, cure osteoporosis, loss of calcium from the bone, etc., and would be helpful to elderly people? Well, to be honest, they don't, neither the AMA or the ADA comes out and says, sure it is, it's going to help everybody, go right to it. They're careful and they qualify what they say. However, this is a report in the Public Health Report 1969. It's a report, a study that was made in the Kingston-Newburgh area, which, as I mentioned to you, started fluoridation in 1945. They made studies of fractures, hip fractures, wrist fractures, osteoporosis by studying x-rays, aorta calcification, vertebral fractures. And rather than go through the whole thing, let's just quote from 2 statements they make. Perhaps 22 years of exposure to 1 part per million of fluoride is too short a period to determine the effects on bone density. A more meaningful research design is needed to assess whether a community water level of 1 part per million of fluoride has any effect on the prevalence and severity of osteoporosis. So after 22 years, they did make a study. The study was made by the New York State Department of Health, the Research Division. They found there was no difference. Another study in 1968 from the Journal of the American Medical Association. This is from the Public Health Report, Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids recently completed 20 years of fluoridated water at a level of 1 part per million. They were compared with 2 control cities in New York State, New York City and Albany, that were non-fluoridated. At the time of the study, they were non-fluoridated. They were fluoridated later. Data were obtained on the quantity of fluoride in the bones of deceased residents of the cities. Quote, "The quantity of fluoride in the Grand Rapids bone specimen does not appear to have been sufficient to exert a beneficial effect on patients with osteoporosis." After 20 years of fluoridation in Grand Rapids, the study made that statement, 1971. In 1965, the New York State Department of Health made another study. The title of it, Incidence of Femoral Fractures in Postmenopausal Women. Summary on page 1011, quote, "Femoral fracture incidence among women 60 years or older in Chemung County, including Elmira, New York, was studied before and after fluoridation of their community water supply. The femoral fracture rates during the 5 years after fluoridation did not change significantly. Whether fracture rates are lowered when women receive fluoridated water before the menopause or for longer periods is unknown and should be investigated." That was in 1965. On page 9 of the journal, same section on bones. Large daily doses of fluoride had a reinforcing effect on patients with osteoporosis of the cochlear capsule, the bone which encases the snail shell-shaped part of the inner ear. After 3 months of treatment, 1 out of 5 patients showed recalcification or increased hardness of this bone. For that study, they footnote that particular statement. It is from a study that is found in the Journal of the American Medical Association, 1968. The study was conducted at Northwestern University and was read as a lecture in Germany in June of '67. That study was performed on rats. Now, I don't say that's bad. Most of our experimental studies are done on animals. But from reading that particular statement, it really doesn't say that. Let's go into the particular study. First of all, there was only 1 experiment out of 11 that was on humans. There were 11 experiments in this study. 10 of them were on rats. Only 1 was on humans. And in that 1 study, they do make the statement, definite improvement with recalcification of the focus in 19%. Now, they've translated that into 1 out of 5, which is what it is. But they don't say that there was no significant change in 71% of the people. Let me quote, "Our experimental studies of fluoride effect on young bone and on experimental osteoporosis indicate a retardation of the resorptive phase of the remodeling cycle as the main effect of fluoride. The dosage of sodium fluoride is critical. In all of our experiments, too small a dose had no effect. A larger dose had a positive effect. As the dose was increased, the positive effect reached a maximum, then became less as the dose was further increased, while at the same time, some of the animals began to die. An exact transfer of dosage schedules from experimental animals to humans is not possible for at least 2 reasons. First, our experiment were on young, growing rats, while the humans with these diseases are most often adults. Second, considering only the young of both, we find that the growth curve is not the same in rat and human, showing a different rate of maturation." And the final concluding remark, quote, "The time may not be far distant when fluoride will be recognized as essential to health, and when it will be prescribed to older persons to prevent senile osteoporosis and frequent fractures. So again, I would say that that report really doesn't have quite the conclusions you might draw from the statement that was given. From the booklet in the AMA, section 35, a very small section, one sentence comment. The title of it, Hematopoietic System, the blood system. Fluoride ingested in levels up to 100 parts per million for as long as 7.5 years does not affect the blood-forming system or cause anemia. Well, that sounds good, doesn't it? They have 5 references for that. You know, it's quite interesting. Once you get into this, you find out more things on footnoting and other areas. 2 references they give are reference number 57 and reference number 66 out of the 5. You know, both of them are the same. Now, it may have been accidental, and I'm not attaching any significance to it, but it's certainly one way to beef up your footnotes. It was done by really quite a simple, and the way it was done almost makes it look intentional. This was a study that was conducted by Hoagstraten, Leon, and some others. Those 2 names are important now. In the footnote of number 57, they have Hoagstraten, Leon, and so on. And then for the page numbers, they have JAMA 192, the journal number, pages 26 to 32, 1965. That's true. Number 66 reference, they have the names reversed. They have Leon first and Hoagstraten second. And for the numbers of the journal, they have page 112. Geez, I went to the journal. I was looking for page 112. And geez, I found 112, but I couldn't find that study. And I went back to page 26, and boy, I had double the time. Finally, it hit me what they did. Might have been accidental. Some of you know that have done any looking through bound volumes of journals. There are 2 sets of numbers on many of them. The monthly journal starts at number 1 and goes through to its conclusion. So let's say in January you have number 1 to 50. Okay, in February you start at 1 and go on again. But for the yearly bound volume, many journals have a second set of numbers, which is the yearly number. So if January goes from 1 to 50, then February starts at 51, then continues all the way through the year. So what they've done here is number 26, page number 26, is the monthly number. Page number 112 is the yearly number. And they reverse the names, which to me makes it almost look intentional. Well, anyway, we have that particular study, and let's refer to it. Okay, let me read it again. You may have lost the gist of it here. Fluoride ingested in levels up to 100 parts per million for as long as 7.5 years does not affect the blood-forming system or cause anemia. Okay, this study was conducted in 1952, went on to 1959, 7.5 years. It was performed, the study was performed on 32 Holstein Friesian heifers, cows. They were 3 to 4 months of age, and they followed them through for the 7.5 years. Now, I don't see anywhere in this particular statement where it says that fluoride ingested in levels up to 100 parts per million. That makes you, doesn't that kind of make you think that they did that on humans? That a human could take up to 100 parts per million as long as 7.5 years and it not affect your blood. That's what I thought first. Humans would do that. Well, it so happens it wasn't humans. It was cows. And the statement they also make is that the normal alfalfa hay diet of a cow that they were using contains 10 to 12 parts per million of fluoride. which is quite a bit larger than the 1 part per million that is recommended. So the normal alfalfa hay diet of a cow has 10 to 12 parts per million per day, and they had 4 groups of 8 cows. They fed them parts per million of 10, 25, 50, and 100 of sodium fluoride, and then went down through. The total number was limited, but the length and periodic evaluations were compensated for it. And it is true that this test, they did not show any gross histological or functional effects on thyroid or liver, does not produce significant changes in the serum calcium or blood chemistry. Blood effect was minimal, no anemia or detectable abnormalities of the bone marrow. The statement they've made is true, but again, it seems to me as though they didn't go far enough in telling people that read that they were talking about cows. The question of osteoporosis is one that comes up quite often, especially for elderly people. I would like to read a statement from a Dr. Clayton Rich, who they say is the originator of fluoride therapy for osteoporosis. I'm sure many professional men will recognize that name. In the Journal of the American Medical Association, a question was asked concerning the undesirable effects of calcium and fluoride in a patient with osteoporosis. Dr. Rich answers as follows, quote, sodium fluoride in the dose used, 50 to 150 milligrams a day, often causes anorexia, lack of appetite, or epigastric pain, stomach pain. Symptoms of osteoarthritis are often made worse during treatment. Aside from these minor points, there is reason for caution about giving sodium fluoride. In addition to its probable beneficial effect of decreasing the solubility of bone salts, it causes significant alterations of bone cell function. Furthermore, not enough subjects have been closely followed to make certain whether the incidence of serious toxic reactions is negligible. Accordingly, until additional clinical experience is gained and better knowledge of efficacy and safety is obtained, sodium fluoride should be considered an experimental drug. That's from Dr. Rich in 1966. Now, when I refer to these dates in the 60s and 50s, please keep in mind that almost all of the information in these journals is from the same time period and earlier. Dosage. This is a very controversial point. How much fluoride is safe? In both of the journals, they very properly call attention to the optimal dosage of 1 part per million. And by count, over 30 references are made to proper dosage, 1 part per million, and all of the statements that are made in the journals very properly say, when properly fluoridated, it's safe. When properly fluoridated to the recommended level, there are no detrimental effects. When properly fluoridated, and that's very important to keep in mind. However, are there some people that might suffer from even properly fluoridated water? We are told no. There's no harmful effects. Well, this isn't what the journals say, the same journals that these quote from. Just to go into a little bit of background, as those of you that are familiar with this whole subject know, the Department of Health recommends a certain dosage depending on temperature. That dosage ranges from 0.7 to 1.2. The dosage will depend on the temperature, the average, mean, maximum temperature over a 5-year period. The dosage is very important. To break it down into parts per million, tenths of a part per million, just by a rise or fall of as much as 5 or 10 degrees over the entire year, I would say dosage is extremely important. That chart goes back to to 1943 and 1953. In 1943, a man by the name of McClure made a determination through a study that a child should ingest 0.5 parts per million from drinking water. He determined that in 1943. In 1953-54, there was a study made by Galligan and Vermillion and some others at the time. And from a study in California, they determined that people drink more in hot weather and they drink less in cold weather. And this has an effect on how much fluoride you'll ingest. So maybe we ought to make some adjustments in this dosage so that in the summertime, in hot areas especially, where they drink more water, put less fluoride in the water. And this certainly makes sense. And they did that. They derived a formula from a study in California, and in 1954, they came up with a chart that is still being used today by the Department of Health. 1953, 63, 73, over 20-some years ago, they're using the same chart. And if we go back to 1943, when McClure determined that in drinking water, you should ingest 5 parts per million. Now, I think it's commonly known by those that have looked into the subject that the human body will ingest more than 1 part per million. But it's the dosage of water at 1 part per million that gives you the additional fluoride, which will bring you up to the level that they say will reduce dental caries. I think it's very difficult, if not impossible, to make the statement that nobody is going to ingest more than this amount through your diet. You'll ingest maybe 2 milligrams, 3 milligrams through diet and water. Now, McClure in 1943 said all you're going to ingest is 0.5 through drinking water. Incidentally, all of these studies were made with children, 12 and under. None of these studies really looked into the consumption of adults. The later studies did. I don't mean to say that the professional people neglected that completely. They were quite thorough in their studies, and I don't mean to imply they weren't. There were studies made on adult consumption of water and fluorides. But the dosage chart, the temperature charts that I'm referring to, were made for children. How about cooking vessels? When you boil water and cook, what happens to the fluoride content there? This is a study from the Journal of Dental Research in 1975. It's a study made in the Department of Pedodontics, University of Iowa, College of Dentistry, Iowa City, Iowa. They took 4 cooking utensils, 4 different compositions: aluminum, stainless steel, Pyrex, and Teflon. They took a pint of water that was fluoridated at 1 part per million. They put all 4 of these vessels on burners. They let them boil for 15 minutes at an even boil. At the end of that 15 minutes, they measured the fluoride content of each of these vessels. In one of the vessels, which I really don't think it's necessary that I mention, and I won't, in one of the vessels, the amount of water had been reduced. Let me get this straight. The amount of water had been reduced by a half, and the fluoride concentration was 3 parts per million. Now, part of this was from the absorption from the cooking vessel itself. The other, of course, because of the reduction of the water itself. Now, if you happen to be cooking with that particular type of a vessel, and you pour water out of your tap, 1 part per million, into that vessel, you cook your vegetables or what have you. After it boils for 15 minutes, in this particular study, that particular vessel, the water was at 3 parts per million of fluoride. I have 3 other studies here that I'd just like to refer to. This is one from Pediatrics, September '74. nephrogenic diabetes insipidus with fluoride. This was conducted by the College of Medicine, Ohio State University, and the Children's Research Hospital Research Foundation, Columbus, Ohio. The three men here that wrote this report, 2 patients whose water consumption ranged from 2.5 to 6 times the normal daily intake. Both lived in areas fluoridated to 1 part per million. However, the patient's excessive ingestion of water has increased the total amount of fluoride consumed to the point where they have teeth modeling and laboratory evidence of fluorosis. Children with polydipsia, an insatiable urge for water, consume excessive quantities of water, and this could lead to fluoride toxicity in a community with acceptable fluoride concentration. Therefore, a portion of the ingested water consumed by these children should be supplied from a non-fluoridated source. The question comes up, when should you begin supplemental means of fluoridation, of giving fluoride to infants? Should you start fluoride drops, pills from birth? At what age should you start giving infants fluoride? I don't think there's agreement on this. Some say from birth. Here's a study out of Pediatrics, April 1975. Dietary fluoride intake of infants from the VA hospital in Hines, Illinois. This study was financed by a grant from the U.S. Public Health Service. The study was to determine the fluoride intake for infants from 1 week to 6 months by analyzing the fluoride content of foods for infants which constitute the infant diet, according to the standards recommended by Mayo Clinic Diet Manual. Quote, the need for fluoride and its effect in the first 6 months of infancy has not been established with certainty. The data obtained in the present study indicate that the dietary fluoride intake for infants aged 1 week to 6 months is adequate, and that additional fluoride supplements would not be needed for infants in this age group. Now, as I started out with, it's very difficult to make a presentation like this because instantly, super doctor, super dentist. What this has done to me is raise a lot of questions. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a dentist, I'm not a statistician, but I know how to read. I know how to go to journals and I know how to read research reports. So when somebody tells me there are no harmful effects, I have to get suspicious, and I think we all do. My reading, my research, and I've only given you part of it there, has shown me that there are some adverse effects. I have read over 100 articles. The Public Health Report, which is a publication of the U.S. Public Health Service, which is the prime organization that is promoting fluoridation. I have read over 35 articles from the Public Health Report. Studies, some quoted in these and some not. I have read articles from the Journal of the American Medical Association, the Dental Association, from Environment, from Chemistry, from Business Week, from the Archives of Environmental Health, the Yearbook of Agriculture, the Congressional Record. I've read articles from many of these journals, and that doesn't make me an expert. What I did find out is how little I do know. But as I say, by reading, I become a little more questioning than the literature might lead one to. I would like to refer just a minute to the cost factor. Throughout the literature, they refer to the cost of fluoridation as being anywhere from 15 cents per resident to 18 cents, 20 cents, something in that area. Well, statistics are funny. It depends on how you want to present them and what you want to show. As we will all admit, fluoride's primary purpose, its beneficial effect, is for the roughly 12 and under age group. although there is some speculation, and I put it in the area of speculation as a layman, on what effect it may have for older people. How do you figure what the cost is? Do you figure it by the total population? Well, really, the total population doesn't benefit from it. Now, in Meadville, it's estimated, and this is just an estimate, that we serve from our water system about 20,000 people. If we take the first year cost, as given as an estimate given to us by our city engineer of $15,120, which not only includes capital costs but the operating expense, by a population served of 20,000, we come up to a cost of 76 cents. However, if we look at it another way, really, 20,000 people aren't paying for it. Only the people that own property are paying for it. So really, maybe we ought to divide this by the taxable properties in the city. Because the person that rents, he doesn't pay for this capital and operating cost. In the city of Meadville, there are 4,787 taxable properties, give or take a few. That comes out to an average cost of $3.16. However, is that even fair? If we want to look at it another way, why not assess the cost based on those that it benefits, 13 and under? By the 1970 census, there were 3,334 residents in Meadville aged 13 and under. So if we base it on that cost, it comes to $4.54 per 13 and under. Then if we want to really build a case, those children don't pay taxes, but their parents do. So if we take those 3,334 people, and we take an average of 2.5 per family, we come up with 1,334 families of those children, and we now come up with a cost of $11.33. Well, that's minimal. I'm not saying that it's really exorbitant. The only point I'm trying to make is that you can really play games with figures. If we take the second and following years, not counting the operating costs, $3,820, going through the same ridiculous method that I've used, population would be 19 cents, taxable properties 80 cents, 13 and under $1.15, families with children under 13 $2.86. So when the journals come out and say it's only going to cost 15 cents or 20 cents per resident, that is true, per resident. But I think it could be looked at another way. Now let me conclude with an item that, if it weren't so serious, is really funny. I think most of you are familiar with Colgate toothpaste. On the box it says, the toothpaste with the anti-cavity ingredient MFP. Clinical tests have shown Colgate with MFP to be an effective aid in the reduction of the incidence of cavities. Then in a box, separate box, the Council on Dental Therapeutics, American Dental Association, has a statement which they endorse this toothpaste with proper use, regular professional care, and so on. So being inquisitive, I wrote to Colgate Palmolive Pete. And I asked them the question, and let me read to you. Could you please provide me with the following information regarding Colgate Dental Cream with fluoride? A, please identify the clinical test referred to that have shown the results claimed. B, a chemical analysis of MFP, sodium monofluorophosphate, especially the percent of fluoride. C, any studies used to justify the ADA statement. I got an answer from them, from the manager of their consumer relations. Dear Mr. Demerit, we have received your letter regarding our Colgate Dental Cream. The documentation of the statements used in advertising our products are not available to the public. However, statements must first be tested in our research center, then be approved by our legal department. We feel this assures truth in our advertising. Very truly yours. Now, you know, as I say, if it weren't so serious, that is really funny. We're talking about fluoride. We're talking about a product that's on the counter, that's available to anyone. On the box, they say that clinical tests have shown. I think my letter was quite polite, courteous. All I wanted to do was know what the clinical tests were. And that's the answer I got. I think this young lady, or she may be young, I don't know, as manager of consumer relations, I think better go back to graduate school and learn something about consumer relations. Now, I should add, I also wrote to the American Dental Association for the same information, and I got it. The American Dental Association sent me about 4 different copies of studies out of journals, and they did answer my questions. So not everybody's trying to hide what the clinical tests were. And I was satisfied by the ADA's answer. I didn't quite agree with some of their conclusions, but that's a layman's privilege, I guess. So on that particular note, I think I will conclude, Your Honor. And again, let me repeat, I don't want to come off sounding like a super doctor. If I learned anything in this, it was how little I really know about this subject. And it did raise many questions to me. And I went right to the journals that were indexed, and I didn't come up with the same conclusions that the leaflets did that we were given. So on that, Your Honor, I will conclude a rather lengthy and perhaps overbearing performance.
Thank you, Councilman.
Your Honor,
Sparkle?
that will be the last time I ever yield to Councilman DeMary.
Strike that from the record.
And I will make my remarks very brief because I do recognize the time constraints that we're on, but this is an important matter. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I want to acknowledge in this way the letters and the communications which you sent to me individually and to the council generally. I can't take time to answer them all. I want you to know that I did read everything that was supplied to me, both the information in the form of letters and also the listing of people who were against or in favor of this issue. I would like to thank particularly some people who sent me data without indicating what way they were believing or what their position was. And I do think that that everybody who came forward did so with sincerity, and I personally appreciate it very much. I want to say, Mayor, that I believe your comments to the media did not assist me personally, and I do not believe assisted this council in the deliberation of this subject. In my view, it injected an issue perhaps that sounded off here with Councilman Kowicki and referring to the possible political implications as a dirty word, if you will. I think the interests of people and the concerns of people have to be taken into account. Some people call this politics, and with you running as mayor, this added a little problem, which I didn't think we needed because we have enough irrelevant comments that have been made on this subject. That's my own view. After reading all this, I came to some conclusions. I know that in the dosages that have been recommended, that it is helpful for children up to the age of 12 to have this in the drinking water. But ladies and gentlemen, we are living in a community, and we have responsibility as a councilman to make a judgment on the basis of the community in which we live. And in that context, I believed I had to take into consideration the views expressed by the people. And I want to zero in just for a moment, not just in terms of numbers of people, but in terms of what the public support is for this issue in substance as well as in numbers. There were, in letters sent to councilmen, there were 51 received in favor of fluoridating the water. there were some 330 in opposition. In addition, there were some 783 people who signed petition against the fluoridating of the water. Not only were there people in numbers who spoke against, but some of them are extreme in their views on the subject. And you've heard all of the reasons. They have been stated. But there are two basic reasons that occur that I think have validity, real validity, and I believe incontrovertible validity. One is that people believe that it is their right to determine what they drink. It is, they are disturbed that someone should force them to drink something they don't want to drink. And coming through the 60s as we have, when people are more and more acutely sensitive to civil rights, to personal rights, to individual rights, and to the over-encroachment of government, I think you have to take a new look at this point of view. And the second thing is that people are beginning to be shaken with the scientific knowledge. And they don't have the kind of confidence in the technology that they, I think, had before the last decade. Things have gone wrong too many times that shouldn't have gone wrong. And the conventional wisdom that we had has been shaken time and again. People think that what they will take from a person individually on a professional basis, they don't believe ought to be imposed on them in a public way. I was told something about how easy it is to get the fluoride if you want it. And the facts are that you can get a 2.5-year supply for one child for $5. Also, the school has the school district can get a reimbursement to the extent of 40 cents per student for any kind of dental care, and it's up to them to use it correctly, or correctly, as they deem best. I don't believe there's any child in our community that has to go without fluoride because of being too poor. Any time a child doesn't have fluoride, I think we have to recognize is some parental responsibility has not been discharged. And living in a democracy, I've got to believe that education and an enlightened and informed public is the only way the system will work for teeth or for anything else. So when you take the fact that it is relatively inexpensive, and I'm told, by the way, that the Head Start and daycare people get this for free, and probably anybody that wanted it could really get it for free. Now that last sentence is a conclusion on my part, but I think there's some facts that substantiate that statement. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to zero in on a question of where is the support for this issue. And I want to say right now that I think the dentists have done a very fine job of doing what they think is right. I think they're sincere about it. I think they've brought something to the fore that should have been brought to the fore. But when you analyze the support, you find that it started with Larry Rodick, who is an individual who professionally is concerned about the care of children. You get Father Karg and the Citizens Advisory Council to the Welfare Services, who are concerned about those children. You get the dentists who professionally believe that this is the thing to do. And you get a very few other people who are very responsive to that kind of public concern. But where are the parents? Where are the people in the community who are individually concerned with this? In my opinion, we have heard from almost none of them. I would say, at the most, as far as I can read it, 25 to 30 people who, as citizens, said, I would like you to fluoridate the water for me or for my children. We haven't heard from any of those people. We have had this groundswell against it, and I think we've had this professional point of view in favor of it. But the citizen point of view in favor of it, I do not believe is there. Now, the last thing that I feel is a very important factor, of course, is the law. Our solicitor tells us that in his opinion, what we have to do, in effect, is challenge the law. In effect, this is what he tells us, that probably we would get away with it, but as he reads it, it is not acceptable, or not in conformity with this old statute, which I know is probably archaic and out of touch with the information that we have today. I'm also aware, and I also reviewed what was submitted to us by him in a number of cases that show the Supreme Court of the United States on a number of occasions has refused certiorari, which means nothing. It just means they decided that day, that time, they weren't going to hear it. They've decided all of their issues have been issues that one time earlier they decided not to hear. So as a lawyer, I don't say that means that when they hear it, what they will do, I don't know, but it is true that they have refused to hear it. So taking into account the nature of the position against it, which I think is substantial, which I've not viewed simply in terms of numbers, but in terms of the position of so many, many people, taking into account what could be done as an alternative, and taking into account, finally, what I consider to be serious legal problems in fundamental rights of individuals to receive and to take whatever the public is to provide them with, whatever we're to provide them with in the way of water, their right to have that provided without something they don't want to take. I must vote against this issue.
Thank you, Councilman. Mr. Stanton?
Well, Your Honor, having admittedly have to admit here, I've been here a decade, which started to bother me, as the fact that I will try not to repeat some of the statements that have been made to keep it in brevity. Again, we have heard from our attorney, and really from Mr. Pepicelli's opinion originally made, that nothing has changed. I felt responsibility, and when this fluoridation came up this time, and again through Dr. Kellogg, I told him, if you're going to bring it, please come prepared. I was thinking and hoping that the Dental Association, Crawford County Dental Association, having gone through it, maybe some of you gentlemen weren't dentists at the time, but some of you men I see sitting in the audience were dentists at the time, saw much of the type of opposition it was, and the type of archaic rule I look at as a 19 agricultural rule. I really felt a responsibility to the Crawford County Dental Association and the dentists of the state of Pennsylvania in this period of time to have done something about that in your strong belief of the fluoridation, which I also agree is a benefit to the children from the 1 to 12. The way I look at it generally, I have not really seen anything really change much in that decade. The dentists went back to work, to their professions. The people went back to their to their ways of life. I remember what one meeting Dr. Harrison gave, I thought, a very nice presentation in relation to the professionalism of the dentist and the reasons for it and this type of stuff. But I mentioned that night, I really wish this was being done at the state level. And yet it's still back. It seems to be avoided. Everybody it comes close to seems to want to avoid it, even, and again, not as an attorney or anything else, but the Supreme Court, the state legislature. I don't know, I think maybe it was Abe Fenton said how many times it's been thrown back in committee. It comes out, it rears its ugly head in the politicians at the state level, who are the same people we represent from our area. Nobody's talking to them about it. There's an association or anything trying to not only ask their support, but force their support into something that's needed, if you feel it's that good. And yet every time it comes and rears its ugly head, it seems to disturb a community to a point that takes months for it to settle down and this type of thing. So it's pretty well known as a JC. I was for this fluoridation at that time. Like any young man at that age, I was raising my family and for the benefits not only to my children but any young children. more so than in those days, that the fact that the young child who was on the low-income group could not get it, had no way to get it, I felt even more concerned of the fact that it was something that we should have in our community. The other part basically is the fact that somewhat of what Ms. Barco said in relation to actually that anybody that wants the pills, wants the treatments, needs the treatments, there seems to be ways to get this done nowadays. I wish that really that the Dental Association could work at the higher level. This being true, as you men say it is, and I believe it to be, I was very much disturbed as I was at the last time it came around, and I will just relate personally that the last time fluoridation came around a decade ago, my name was forged 4 times in the use with money and everything else in relation to the tack that I took it to Jack Holt to say, I don't know, I'm a photographer, but isn't this a criminal offense? And he said, yes, it was. Do you want me to pursue it? I said, no, I don't. It's not that case. I thought, to me, it's a pretty severe way of using my name in return to sending for publications, which I had not sent for, this type of thing. So with this in mind and all the other things, and especially the response has been, again, told by the community does not seem to want this. These same people in this community are your patients, Dennis, and I felt in this period of this decade that through your true beliefs, through your treatment of your patients, through your education of their parents, and even sometimes what used to be the children, the parents of their children now, that through your knowledge and education, you would have convinced the majority of the people that this is a thing to have, but obviously it hasn't happened. I was extremely disturbed with that advertisement in the paper in relation to the pictorial ad. To me, it was was like venom. I just detested that advertisement in the paper by the anti-fluoridationists, no matter who they be and how it got into the paper or who sponsored or anything else. I hate to think that is the way to get a job done, and it's not the way to get a job done. But as late as 5 o'clock coming into Meadville this evening, the radio report was that their consensus was that 86 of the people responded to WMGW did not want fluoridation. You heard the figures from Ms. Barco in relation to the community itself who have written, and in these signatures, and as far as I know, in most part, were signatures that had been checked out in relation to addresses and names being done properly. I know the last time around we had signatures, petition signers from Jimtown and Lionsville and God knows all over creation. So I think the true response from the community that's living here are telling us as elected officials we do not want this. And for that reason, not to repeat what Ms. Barco says, I think at some point along the line the people do have their rights, and this is as we all remember, it's not news. The first time on referendum it was voted down 2-1. On the last time, and being on council and being in an affirmative position at that time, fluoridation was passed at one council meeting on a 3-2 vote. But Mr. Peposelli, as an attorney, did say there was one opinion that he had not really given us the full details on and that type of thing, and that was our risk if we voted it that night. And of course, that fluoridation was voted into Meadville 3-2. At the next council meeting, he gave his opinion, which related to this 1909 agricultural ruling, that it turned one councilman around from a yes to a no vote, which turned it back down 2-3. And to me, some of the same names, I again appreciate the letters, like other councilmen have said, the people who responded, both for and against, and I think in many cases, honestly and sincerely in what they believed. But I think so far what's been asked of the community, what's been written in the newspapers in relation to letters of the editor, and what's been asked through the radio, what's asked for by the community, whether they asked, the community action group asked for a response or council asked for a response, but the response we got at the city is overwhelmingly that they do not want it in this community at this time.
All right, Mr. Stanton. I'll try to be as brief as the briefest of you, because I did have a say with the press last Friday, and I won't repeat the points that I made, although for the record I think the summary of them should be listed. I didn't particularly want to see this matter come before the council. Don't know whether I'm that much of a political animal or not. Maybe I am. A lot of things I don't know. A lot of things I don't know about myself yet. But one of the reasons I didn't want it to come up is that there's no middle ground. Usually in political things, the art of politics, to say, is an art of compromise, looking for some solution that makes everybody happy. I guess I didn't like this because there's no room for compromise. It's a yes or no, up or down situation. So the fact that I didn't want it to come doesn't mean that I'm not willing to confront it. Second, I made a decision to make known my views in advance to the other members of council and to the public in general. Couldn't really make them known to the council without the public in general under the Sunshine Law. The range of response is between not helpful and hogwash. So I guess my idea wasn't a very good one. What I was expressing in the paper, in giving my views, was that there were a couple things that I was very doubtful about, and I wanted people to know I was doubtful about them. One thing was that I was in doubt, on the basis of what I'd learned from Mr. Chitroma, that if we voted to fluoridate the water, fluoridate the public water supply, and then later, in view of evidence or another expression of public will or a change of mind by the proponents, for whatever reason, if we decided as a local community that we better take it out, we were going to have a scrap on our hands because another city or other cities in the state now are having problems when they try to remove their addition of fluoride. And I think specifically it's the city of Lebanon decided that they were not going to do it anymore, and the state came in pretty heavy in the form of the DER and said, as I have it, no, you just can't do that, hold on. And it's in the courts and hasn't been decided. But that was put a question mark on this matter to me. Second, I wanted the councilman, the other councilman, to know that I had a doubt about the wisdom, whoever was the source of the wisdom, or however it's embedded in the law, that if 18,000 people or 9,000 people shouldn't vote on a matter because it's a public health issue, then I don't see why 5 people should vote on it because it's a public health issue. I think if it's a public health issue, then it should be public health people that made. But that's a question. That was a question and doubts in my mind. I never did resolve them, and I expressed them as cautions to the council about this vote. I think what we're after is something that the council all would agree on. I agree. To do something for the poor, neglected kids whose teeth aren't taken care of. I'm for that. Really. And my own children, we had fluoride for their teeth. We started it late with the first one. We had more treatment for the second one and the most for the third one. And the oldest one has the poorest teeth, although they're pretty good. The second one has next best, and the youngest one has the best teeth. That's just one case. But I believe in it. The whole argument, to me, is whether or not the public water supply is the way to get the job done. There is a job that should be done for that group of neglected, poor, they're often the same people. Children, something should be done, but I don't believe so far that the water supply is the answer. My judgment is that the bulk, I agree with the other councilman here that's spoken most recently, that the bulk of our citizens want to decide what or what not that they're going to take into their systems, into their bodies. That's what they want. And even more people than that number want every citizen to have that right, at least, to decide. And that constitutes a large group. And insofar as I like my office and want to continue in it, yeah, I do care a lot about what all the people think. And my advice to the newspaper release and now to the council is that I really believe, and I'll stake myself on it, that the people don't want the water supply to be the vehicle to get the job done. I think that the people are, American people are, I'm studying politics, I'm just learning it and following it more closely. And I think that right now, 1977, that the people are trying to say something to us in Meadville. And they're trying to say it all across the country, and most recently on a national level, when they said it when the Vietnam War was going on, and President Johnson was conducting that war, as President Kennedy before him. People finally got around to saying, no, for whatever reason, you can't just be the ones to say and go ahead and prosecute a war. We never voted for it, our elected representatives voted for it, and no, stop it. And they brought that president down, right down to his knees and out of office, and shortened his life, I'm sure. The next president, again, the people sent him a message. They said, no matter, you can't obstruct the law just because you think it's in our best interest to protect us from subversives or whatever. We can't do it. Now, they sent him a message. And the message is loud and clear. I think that this same kind of message is coming through from people. Again, I'm not even a political scientist, but I have that view as a person practicing in politics. Well, I think that the thing that's would be irresponsible of us if we do not use the public water supply to get this job done, to get the young people teeth taken care of. If we don't do something or explore or continue to explore other ways to get this done, then we're irresponsible. I don't think the irresponsible thing is to vote against the fluoridation of the water. I think the irresponsible thing is to vote against fluoridation of the water, all things considered. But it would be irresponsible for us if we just dropped it if there is a negative vote. So, members of council, we can be guided now by all of you. I suggest that if you want, we can go around once again and maybe in reverse order and see if there's anything you'd like to add. Mr. Stanton?
Your Honor, I can only relate to the treaty. This came over to television tonight, again,
Yes.
strictly by accident. And Meadville was part of the early news in relation to, those fluoridation. I think right after that, there was again of another thing that is being handled, I will say, by a medical man or a dentist that was testing and showing something that, in fact, the newscaster said that the arena of fluoridation, whether it be Meadville or any place in any community, may be a mute situation within a 5-year period, because this man has found something that takes care of both cavities and plaque. It's okay, how about that? And that naturally it has to be tested out and confirmed, which would take about a 5-year period. But if, maybe you professional men know what this is, but this was done as on the broadcast and showing the testing in view that this is a possibility in the near future that will take care of this. Now, that's all I can offer. It's nothing. It's just an informational thing. And I only know the 2 or 3 minutes that I've heard over television before I came, to the meeting tonight. I don't know if it's the answer or not, but they were certainly letting the public know that there is something that they're working on.
Mr. Stanton? Mr. DeMaria?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Sparkle. I'm sorry, that wasn't in the reverse order.
That's all right, Your Honor. I just wanted to mention that I didn't mention in those numbers that I gave, and this is just for the record, I didn't mention the people that just spoke and talked about it. What I talked about are the ones that are in writing and that we have received at City Hall. There were several hundred others, various kinds of sorts.
I think I'd like to just, Mr. Cook, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Your Honor, perhaps back in February, we let our Citizens Advisory Council go out to the people we may have had the the response I think that the council is looking for tonight, or at least an answer to the question they have in their own minds with regard to whether or not the citizens of this community want fluoridation. My own judgment is, Your Honor, that a well-organized, very vocal minority has overwhelmed the majority in this case. I am personally convinced that the people that really are concerned about fluoridation are the people who will not sit down because they're taking care of children, because they have responsibilities in the home, because they have responsibility to their families. People like myself, quite frankly, who are doing things and involving themselves in a way that you just don't have time to sit down and move away from your 4 or 5 or 2 or 3 children and write a letter to the council and say, hey, look, fellas, I'm concerned about fluoridation. I submit to this council that if it's petitions they want endorsing fluoridation, I suspect that it wouldn't take too long a period of time to get a majority of the community to present those petitions to the council. I am convinced of the beneficial effects that fluoridation can have. I am satisfied, and I suppose if I had the time, I could rebut each and every argument that Mr. DeMary has presented, as well as the arguments that the others have advanced as well. Unfortunately, I think the issue was decided long before it was presented to the council. I, in my own mind, in my own judgment, believe that the issue is an issue that was decided on the basis of a political kind of a political context. I'm upset that it's come to this.
I want to make myself clear on this thing. I don't think these 900 people or 1,200 are wrong. I don't think they're wrong. I think they have a point of view. There is such a thing as a point of view, and I think they have the right to that point of view.
You see, I don't dispute that at all.
And I don't, please believe me, when this word political bothers me, because if it's political because you're worried about votes, I'm not worried about votes. I'm not worried about votes. But I do care what people think, and I don't care necessarily about the basis for that point of view. You know, we're living in a country where this is their right. And I don't think that it's up to me to brainwash them or to try to teach them something else. I think if we can't live in a country where people are intelligent enough about even making private mistakes, then this isn't the country to live in. There are other countries where people will decide what's best for you from before the cradle to after the grave.
Mr. Corky, did you finish?
Your Honor, I respect the rights of the people to speak as they believe, honestly, in their convictions. Well, if you analyze the petitions and the signatures on the petitions, Your Honor, and I don't want to get into what went on in 1966, you'll find probably half of those petitions were from people that had no right to sign a petition, by those people that opposed the introduction of fluoridation, going out and asking on a door-to-door basis in the entire county whether or not they would vote fluoridation. And quite frankly, I don't think that was proper. I don't think it was proper for the radio to go on the air and ask for people to send in their indication of how they would vote for fluoride. I think this was wrong. I think it was the people that were, well, I said it.
Sure. Well, your remarks are on record. I wanted to add only that for all of you who've written to the council, as Ms. Barco said and other members of council said, we really were appreciative of those letters. They're helpful and they were read. And but I want to say that in this instance, we probably won't answer them all, but they will be on, the job is just much too burdensome, but that they will be on file, and they'll remain on file as they were before. Members of council, are you ready for the vote on this issue? The roll call vote, please.
Barco?
No.
Kowicki?
Aye.
DeMaria?
No.
Stanton?
No.
Roman?
No. The motion then fails. Ladies and gentlemen, we have, are there other items of new business not known to the chair, or old business not known to the chair? We have on it's an agenda item, an opportunity for members of the audience who are citizens of Meadville to address the council if that's their wish. That is the agenda item, and is there anyone who wishes to do this? All right, thank you. Members of council, are there items of new business not known to the chair? If there is no new business, a motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. I will second that motion. The roll call vote, please.
Barkle. Kowicki. Demerit. Rule.
Aye.
That's carried. Thank you all for coming and for your interest. Thank you to Channel 13.